Hey, Philip, guess what?
What?
We just reached our 1,000th view.
Really? That's fantastic.
I think so. I think it's probably worth us taking a few minutes here just to thank our guests, the people who've gone on and watched our videos. When we started this out back in October of last year,
right.
we didn't necessarily have any big goals in mind, but the 1,000th view means that people are getting on there, they're checking out our content, they're giving us those important likes and the comments, and we appreciate that. It fuels us. It's a bit of a passion project for us, and we're excited about bringing potentially things that people are going to like as well.
Absolutely, things. Definitely a passion project. This is, we have full-time jobs or consulting gigs and whatever not. So we do this as spare time, not to monetize it, but just to share our experiences and knowledge and that of our guests. And so thank you guys for taking the time to watching this. And please, as Carlos mentioned, keep on liking, commenting, or subscribing, and let us know what it is that you like to watch in the future. Once again, thank you for those views, and we look forward to continue doing this. Take care.
And remember,
to be good
and do good.
There you go. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Business Fusion. I'm your host, Philip de la Vega, joined by my co-host, Carlos Raldiris. And today we have a very famous person, Larry King. Larry, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Larry is an accomplished financial executive. He's been a CFO, CEO. Right now, he's also working with multiple boards as an advisor, director. But that's my perspective on it. Larry, give us a little background on you. How did you get here? What are you up to nowadays?
Well, background, I came from the same part of the country you guys did way back when. I was raised up in the Northeast, went to school, college in the Boston area, came to Texas. I thought just for a couple of years stint. I was planning on going back and working with my dad. He was a CPA as well. And unfortunately for him, I fell in love with the Dallas area, and I've been here ever since. And it would never look back.
Fantastic.
So that's kind of that's how I got to Texas. I got here as soon as I could, and started out in public accounting here, third generation. And in 1982, left and started my own practice. And we grew that practice with some partners I brought in over the years. And by 2003, we were one of the larger local firms. We merged another practice in 2003. And then in 2009, merged our combined practice into a national firm. And in 2015, I took early retirement from the national firm and set on this new journey of helping companies grow through board and advisory board roles. And I've been loving that role. It allowed me to continue to work in the same market that I used to work in. We were always a middle market firm, but not compete with my old partners and my old firm that I'd helped build.
Okay, great. And tell us a little bit of what are you up to nowadays? I understand you have some private directors organization activity or something.
Yeah, so as well as serving on a couple of boards and advisory boards, I'm very passionate about the value that boards can bring to private companies. And so a couple of other fellows and myself, we started a chapter of the Dallas chapter of the Private Directors Association, which was originally founded in Chicago back in 2014. And we've been building the local chapter for the last about 2.5 years. And we're currently up to 80 members here locally. Nationally, there's 22 chapters and about 3,000 members. So it's an organization that's really caught on nationally because of the need in the private sector for boards and advisory boards. There's a lot of value creation that can be had for these private companies, and we really want to be giving back to the communities that we're in. And that's a passion of mine. Dallas was very good to me through my career, and it's time to give back, and this is a good way I can give back to the community.
Governance is a big word. Covers multiple aspects of it. Why is this needed in your experience that you've seen or that you've experienced?
Well, there's a couple of answers to that. if you go back to kind of one of the foundations is if you form a corporation in almost any state in the country, there's a requirement to have a board of directors. So it's a compliance issue to some folks. And so then it becomes just a check the box item, and they just assign a few people to be directors and they sit around and don't do much. But the companies that take it seriously and actually apply good corporate governance, take it to the next level and actually bring in talent that can help them grow the company. If you look, especially on the private company side, if you look at most private company founders, they're very good at one or two or three things, but they can't be good at everything. They can't be great at everything. And so by bringing directors in that have specific expertise to supplement the founder's expertise, that founder can really surround themselves with a lot of talent to help grow their company and maximize value. That's
interesting, Larry. One of the things I have been thinking a bit about is the types of talents, if you will, that could be beneficial from that perspective. Give us a sense, if you will, of the types of skill sets that you like to see in what I'll call, non-private equity boards.
That's a great question. And I hate to always say this, but it depends. A lot of it's driven by the particular company, the growth stage they're in, whether it's an early stage, mature company, if they're building to sell, or if it's a lifestyle company. All those factors kind of play into what kind of skill sets you may need on the board. And then it also revolves around what skills the management team has and where the gaps are. And so I usually like to start out with kind of an assessment and building a board matrix that checks off the skill sets that are existing within the company through the management team, and the skill sets that they feel they need to be successful to the highest level, and then fulfilling those particular areas by bringing in board members that have that kind of expertise. So again, it really depends on the company, where they are in their life cycle, and just where they're trying to take the company to go. If you're building to exit, like a technology company that you're building for a fast growth and an exit, it's going to look differently than a lifestyle company. You're going to probably want people on the board that have M&A experience, maybe capital raising experience. If you're a technology company, you need people with deep technology expertise. In this day and age, you need people with cyber expertise, somewhere around the table, because that's obviously a constant threat, and especially in the last week or so, that's a heightened level of activity we're seeing and diligence that needs to be taking place. And so it really, again, I guess it really depends, and it's kind of done on a case-by-case basis.
But surely there's some common, competencies that you think all board members should have.
Well, sure. I mean, you should have good general business experience and background. The staple committees that boards have are going to be around the audit and finance committee, the compensation committee, and then the nom-gov committee, the nominating and governance committee. But we're seeing more and more emphasis on ESG, on cybersecurity, lately supply chain issues. And so we're seeing more committees being formed, either as formal committees or as subcommittees. And then you've also got situational types of committees that can be formed. I mean, if your company is approached by a buyer or a private equity group, you may want to form an M&A committee to really just focus and hone in on that particular activity and bring that expertise in with people that really can help you through that episode. And then that board position may go away, or that committee may go away after that transaction is completed.
Got it. So to be clear, what you're saying is that these are committees that are made up of advisors that are not necessarily board members, right? They are people outside of the formal board. Or
yes,
are you
right? Yeah, the formal board is going to be the first three generally: the audit committee, the comp committee, and the nom-gov committee. And the cyber committee is starting to become a standing committee also. But a lot of the other ones the expertise can be provided by a subcommittee or an advisory committee or an advisory board to take on those functions. And they don't necessarily fill that fiduciary role of a true dedicated board, but they can add a lot of value to the company.
Got it.
What has been your experience or what advice do you have for that type of situation where sometimes the CEO is the chairman of the board and the chairman of the board may not see the need for a committee, much less a subcommittee?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a challenge. I mean, if you're talking about private equity usually has enough of a hammer, if you will, to be able to push to get that done. Now, having said that, most private equity boards don't use the committee concept as much as they do as a public company would, or as a non-private equity private company would, because the private equity company has those kinds of expertise within their own ranks, and they kind of perform those functions for the company in a, they call it a board role, but it's also kind of a managerial role.
What have you seen as some of the major financial differences or requirements between public and private boards? Clearly, there's some reporting requirements that are different, or maybe there isn't as much as we think there is.
Well, the reporting requirements are different in that a public company is, it's got quarterly filings that are public. So you got Qs and Ks, 10 Qs and 10 Ks, 10 Qs each quarter and 10K at the end of the year. The audit committee is going to be much more involved with the selection of the auditors and working with the auditors and getting feedback from the auditors during the process. And so it's a different role than you would see generally with a private company. Some private companies don't even have a formal audit committee. They just have, a director that kind of handles that process for them. He's kind of acting as the audit committee, but it's not a multi-member committee, depending on how large a board they have. And a lot of private companies don't have audited financial statements. They don't file quarterly information with their investors, if they have investors. And so it's a much less formalized process. And the other thing is with a public company, there's also requirements that the audit committee be chaired by a financial expert as defined by the guidelines. And the other members of the audit committee need to have financial expertise. And again, a lot of times on a private company, you won't have those kind of formalities in the process. I mean, best practices would be you would have somebody very strong financially, that's taking care of the audit committee, but there's no actual requirements for that. And mostly with private companies, the audit committee is going to be involved somewhat on a quarterly basis, but not to the same extent it might be on a public company where the audit committee has to be very actively involved because they've got to sign off on the Q filings, each quarter. So there's much more engagement in a public company that I've seen than there would be in a private company.
Larry, you've done a great job of helping us to understand the differences between, private equity and just private company boards, right? Mm-hmm. As well as, giving us a sense of what public company boards, that some of the regulations that kind of guide their work and the responsibilities of the board members. I'd love to do a little bit of a deep dive on the process, right? So, those of us who have worked in management, we know that there is nothing like an impending board meeting to focus the mind, and I'd love to get a sense of what the process is like, right? So put yourself in the shoes, if you will, of the board secretary, the individual who has to kind of organize the next meeting. Take us through what it's like, if you will, to get ready, both as a management team member, as well as a board member for, a board meeting.
Okay. So I'm going to start out with best practices, and then we'll talk about what happens in real life. So best practices would dictate that management start several weeks before the board meeting, putting together a board package, which would be, financial information, operating information, just whatever the KPIs of the company are, addressing where they stand related to those KPIs, and get that board package finalized and out to the board members, ideally a week, 10 days in advance of the board meeting. So that the board members then flip to that side. The board members have time to dive in, really understand everything in that report, and be prepared when they go into the boardroom for the meeting with questions and comments related to that, all that information. So that's kind of the ideal format. In reality, that time frame usually gets very, very squeezed. The board package goes out, hours or a day or two before the meeting. The board members have other things on their plate because a lot of them have other jobs. And a lot of the discussion in the board meeting becomes reporting and asking questions then. And the lack of preparation impacts the quality and the results of that board meeting.
Management team and the board understand just how important compensation is and approvals for it around this time of the year. But oftentimes, there will be maybe less urgent matters that are never gotten to, right? Or, it was up on the agenda and, then we hear back, oh no, we didn't get a chance, so we pushed it, right? I'm working with a client right now that is waiting for some feedback for the board about an important project that's coming up, and it's been slid, if you will, a few times. So tell us a little bit about some of the things that can come up, in the process that really cause the agenda to go awry.
Especially in this day and age with things happening so fast, that's not an uncommon occurrence. One of the things that I think is part of that process that we discussed is that there should be engagement between the lead director or the chairman and the rest of the management team in terms of putting that information together. And a well-organized agenda would prioritize the topics. And obviously you don't want to leave a topic like compensation and bonuses that need to be paid to the last item on the agenda, because then if you don't get there, you're in trouble. So I think, again, proper preparation and timing of that agenda is important. And then a good chairman or lead director, whoever's leading the meeting, staying to budgeted time for different issues. And if something is getting out of hand, figuring out whether that needs to be resolved or that can be tabled and addressed at some other point. But again, I think the more preparation and the more thought that goes into the preparation, the less chances there are for those things to get out of hand. If you've got, the compensation committee that's dealt with all the, the bonuses and the compensation issues and is well prepared and has prepared a good analysis for the board in preparation for the board meeting, they're generally going to know if there's a bust in there somewhere well before the board meeting, and it shouldn't come up at the board meeting.
Right.
And so I think, again, there's no guarantees on these things, and things do surface. I mean, when COVID hit, that wasn't on anybody's agenda for the next board meeting until it was. And, I'm sure there's a lot of things that slid at that point in time because the priorities were really, how are we going to keep the doors open? What are we doing to address this issue? So when you have those kind of crises, all bets are off onto the original agenda, and you have to adjust. And I guess, again, it's that's when management and the board really need to coordinate and make the right things happen.
I was going to say, because there's a misconception that board meetings should only be done quarterly. Quarterly, I think is being known as a standard, but it could be done any frequency or cadence during the year, depending on the need.
Yeah. I've been involved. Quarterly is kind of the standard. For a lot of private companies and advisory boards, we have monthly calls in between the quarterly board meetings. And so we're on the phone or on Zoom every month. I've been in situations where those got reduced to weekly during COVID, the beginnings of COVID, when the PPP funding was just coming out. They were weekly, and in some cases, a couple of times a week, there were conversations going on because, that's just what's going on. And especially with advisory boards, I find that you're much closer to management in an advisory board. You don't have the fiduciary responsibilities, but you also don't have the restrictions from getting involved with management. So, for example, a couple of the advisory boards I was on actually got in and helped them put together their PPP forgiveness loan applications because their in-house bookkeeper wasn't, capable of going through all the iterations of that and the changing rules and everything else and keeping up with it all. And so that's not normal, but it was necessary. I just did what I had to do. With the boards I was on, it was more on a consultative basis or advisory basis, kind of checking in with the CFO, making sure they were on top of it, comparing notes as to what the rule changes were on a daily basis to make sure that we're all on the same page and helping them make sure they were on top of it. But it was still up to the CFO and the management team to actually file the application. And the same with the forgiveness side of it. So again, your roles are different a little bit. And I think you've got to adjust on the fly when crises hit or major economic obstacles get in the way. And in today's day, they're happening on a regular basis.
Yeah, I was talking to a CEO. He asked me just for my opinion on a couple of things in private equity. And one of the things that they didn't quite do, which I know we've done probably for bigger companies, is the typical BCP or business continuity plan, right? When there's a disruption, typically it had to do with technology or IT and whatever not, or sometimes supply chain. But nobody foresaw COVID being so disruptive. And my understanding, and correct me not correct me, rather share if you've had the same experience, Larry, is that a lot more private equity companies now are looking into that business continuity plan a little more seriously, because in the past, maybe it was just left for bigger corporations, right? We're nimble, we're small, we're fast. Maybe, what has been your experience?
Well, if they're not, they should be, because business continuity plans, I mean, are mission critical, and I think it goes beyond just those plans too, because the whole pace of change has changed dramatically, and a couple of years ago, supply chain was a procurement and maybe a chief operating officer issue. Board never really got involved with that. Now all of a sudden it's an enterprise risk and the board's involved. And I think the same applies with the private equity, because they're kind of in that same role. They're probably looking at those kinds of things much differently than they were a year or two ago before some of these crises popped up, because nobody saw the supply chain issues change to this degree. I mean, there's always been a few challenges here and there, but nothing as radical as what we've seen over the last year or two. And the same thing with COVID. Nobody was expecting that. But having said that, if you had a decent business continuity plan, and it was technology based, because that's, again, most of them were, a lot of the same processes took place. Our business continuity plans take into account, what if there's a breakdown of the buildings, a fire or a flood, and nobody can get to the office? And so how do you work remote? Well, COVID created the same kind of situation. It was a little bit different, but you still, all of a sudden, one day, everybody's working from home. And so if you had your business continuity plan set for technology, you should have been able to pivot that and make that work. So some of those plans were able to carry over, but again, nobody saw it coming the way it did. And I think it's incumbent on management and boards going forward, whether it's private equity, public, private, to be thinking a little bit more outside the box as to what can go wrong. Don't look in the rearview mirror and see what has gone wrong, because history does have a tendency to repeat itself, but it also repeats itself in strange ways sometimes. And so I think you got to think outside that box of just what had happened last time.
Your organization really helps, create advisory boards, right? Educate people around the need for it, train them, and so on and so forth. Obviously, financial or financial related advisory groups, if you will, are important for the functioning of some of these businesses. Are there some others that, that come to mind for you as being especially sensitive or important?
So there's a number of different groups out there. With Private Directors Association, we're looking at helping set up advisory boards and fiduciary boards for private companies. And so we kind of focus on those things. There's other groups that perform individual functions. So for example, there's fractional CFO groups that can provide a fractional CFO for a project or for an interim, if their permanent CFO left and they need somebody to fill a gap until they find a new one. There's fractional CIO groups out there. You can find fractional almost in any category. There's different marketing groups. And so those provide a valuable function for a specific purpose for a specific period of time. Whereas what we're doing with the Private Directors Association, forming those advisory boards, is those are more long-term type of situations. A private company, once they form their board, they're probably going to have it for life. If they have an advisory board, it may or may not be for life. A lot of them do have it for a very long period of time if it's kind of a general advisory board that's helping them with their business. But the complexion of those boards may change over time. An advisory board in an early stage company is going to look different than an advisory board for a middle stage or later stage company. Same with their fiduciary board. The fiduciary board for a startup company is probably going to be more geared to the capital raising side, getting the company into the market. So maybe helping open channels for distribution and supply chain channels. Whereas once they're more mature, that board is going to be more mature as well and function in a different role for that company. So the life cycle plays a lot up in both those answers to both of those things.
That's a very helpful, Larry. What I really would love to get a sense of, because there are people who listen to our podcasts and who are interested in potentially either being board members or advisory members. What would you recommend to them as the approach to getting recognized, identified, potentially being set for an advisory role?
Well, I think the key is, again, as we talked about earlier, is the networking, it's your personal relationships, and continuing to build those relationships. Making sure that your LinkedIn profile is up to date and is attractive to somebody that might be trolling the LinkedIn or even has been checking in on you. But I think there's other avenues that you can do as well. There's organizations out there. We do some of that through Private Directors Association with training and the connections. There's a platform out there called Bolster, which we partner with through the Private Directors Association, but you can go directly to Bolster and they actually do a deep dive on your profile. You can post it out there and companies go to Bolster to find specific talent skills for fractional roles, interim roles, that kind of thing, and advisory board roles as well. So I think there's a couple of different avenues, but I think, if you have a certain set of skill sets, staying active in trade associations, of industry associations, things that are connected to your expertise where you get to meet people, that can be of value as well. But it really boils down to your personal network at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic advice, Larry. Look, you've had a very successful career, in finance, starting a business, your practice now as a board member and advisor, but not to date ourselves. But if you were to give some advice, so 20-something-year-old Larry, what advice would you give this person?
Well, that's a long time ago, Philip.
Like a couple of years ago. Go ahead.
Yeah. I guess two things really kind of come to mind. One is it's never too early to start building your network.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked a lot about networking today, but it's never too early to start building that network. I was amazed. I wasn't that intentional about it when I first got started. And in retrospect, I wish I had been much more so. But even to the extent I did it, it's amazing that 5, 10, 15 years later, somebody would pop up that I had met and made an impression on, and something would come out of it from a business standpoint. And so I just don't think you can say enough about building that network, maintaining the network, continuing to work the network. We didn't have LinkedIn back then. I mean, that's a huge tool to be able to continue to build that network and to keep it current. I used to have a paper Rolodex. It's a little bit harder to keep track of people that way. And I think probably the second thing was I wish I had thought bigger sooner. Thinking big and bold, you may not always be able to hit those marks, but if you think small, you're never going to get past small. And so I think it is important to think big and think bold, be realistic. I mean, I think you need to be able to look in the mirror and know what your strengths and weaknesses are. Most people can figure out what their strengths are. Not too many people want to focus on their weaknesses, but I think it's important to know where your weaknesses are, so you can either work around them or work through them, or go get trained to get better at those. Because if you keep training for your strengths, you're going to get very narrow at the end of the day. And I think you need to train for strengths and weaknesses. So I think the big two would be the networking and think big and bold.
Great advice.
Great advice. Absolutely. Carlos, any last words?
You got a time machine, I'll go back 20 years and try it out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Larry, this has been really helpful. Thank you so much for participating in our board series. I feel like I've learned so much more about not only public boards but also private boards and private equity boards. So we appreciate your sharing those insights. We'd love to help you develop your membership as best we can. If people wanted to learn more about your organization and becoming an advisory board member, what do you recommend?
Well, they can reach out to me. I'm glad to be able to help. Again, part of my mission is giving back to the community and helping people get connected where they need to be connected. So reaching out to me personally, or they can go to privatedirectorsassociation.org and the website there and learn more about what we're doing there. And I really enjoyed being part of this program, and you guys are great to work with, and look forward to continuing to build our relationships as well.
That is fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you, Larry. Thank you for your time, sharing all the insights once again. Folks, hopefully you guys enjoy this and find it interesting. Please, if so, like, comment, subscribe. But until next time, Larry, that's a wonderful name and very memorable.
Easy to remember.
Just helped out a lot. Until next time, guys, be good and
do good.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.